Wow, what a ride. Getting to a finished product for chapter one took a long time, but I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, I really am too. And this chapter definitely has some stories behind it that we can share.
Just writing chapter one of a book is a super hard challenge. But given that this is our first release and this is an audio drama, we really had a lot of work to do.
No doubt. And I agree with you. First chapters are notoriously hard. I was wondering when I was first reading this chapter, why did you choose to open up this book at a bar?
That's a good question. The bar was a really great opportunity for me to introduce this world. Most vampire characters are just so cool that they would easily pick up a girl with just no problem. But I had this idea of a character who didn't have mind control powers and he didn't look like Brad Pitt. He was a technology guy and he was never great with women.
Oh, so it's you.
Yeah, that really gave me a chance to introduce him as this master of technology and also to introduce his AI assistant. She is really his friend, and he needed her to pick up women. But you're right. I never had a great track record of being a pickup artist. So that is why I really enjoyed making this pickup scene. I spent a lot of time researching how guys would pick up women in bars, because again, no clue. And that gave me this idea that Aiden could use Linda to really get background information about Samantha, and she could create a script for him. And then there's also this idea that she dresses him, and all of this comes together to form an image that works for this guy. He had no chance on his own, but now with all this help, he's actually successful.
Okay. Okay. So this setting was really useful for a couple of reasons. It introduced two of your main characters, and it also kind of showed their dynamic and how Aiden uses Linda to help him with his hunting. And that reminds me, Pete, don't you also have a little AI companion that helps you do your work as a writer better?
You know what they say, if you don't use AI well, you're going to be out of work, replaced by someone who does. But you have to be judicious with it or you wind up delivering slop. And I'm just applying the same idea to writing. It's not that you should or you shouldn't use AI at this point. You should use AI well.
Okay, but I don't want to give our audience the wrong idea. You're not using the AI to actually do the writing of the story.
No, far from it. I'm doing a lot of work to let AI help me with this story. So let me back up and talk about my process. I start out by creating a character compendium, and my compendium is much larger than any single chapter in this book. It has loads of details about every character that I'll probably never use. Then I create a world building doc, and that has all the details of how the world works and all of the background information and just has a lot of history. So that sets a ton of context. The third pillar that I use is a style guide, and that shows very explicitly how I want things to be written. This has a combination of examples as well as explicit instructions about what I want AI to do, but also what I don't want AI to do. And then once I start to approach a chapter, I write a very detailed outline. And then each of these areas in the outline, I start to expand and draw detail into, partly with the help of AI, but mostly with my own writing. And then I iterate and iterate until it's a good product.
Wow, dude, that is a lot of stuff that you wrote before you even got to chapter one. And the audience isn't even seeing any of that stuff.
No, but they're definitely seeing the fruit of all that labor. All of those go into what are called sources for ChatGPT. And yes, I feel like I am behind the times because I am using ChatGPT and not Claude. I may make that move sometime in the near future. But all of those go into the source documents for ChatGPT. And this creates a model in ChatGPT that really is customized to how I want things to be done and really helps me make things consistent and clean.
So, if I understand correctly, ChatGPT has all this context that it can then draw on whenever you ask it for any sort of help.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's also a secondary process of iteration. I am a huge believer in collaboration, and this just comes from my background. and how I work. So I get out very early versions of this to my test readers, namely you and Petey, and I get a lot of feedback from you guys, and I listen and I iterate with that feedback. And that's what takes it from, hey, this is clever material to this is well written. This has a lot of depth to it because I didn't just write it. Some of my assumptions about what the reader is going to see in this are incorrect. And so getting that early feedback and adapting it to that feedback to make certain areas more clear, to add intention between characters, that is what really helps me to make what I think is a good product.
And speaking of using Pete and me as early readers who gave you feedback, that was really my first introduction to this entire project. I think my earliest memory, other than you telling me you had a great idea for a book, was when you had finally written about the first 5 or 6 chapters and sent them off to Pete and me to read. And something that I was really struck by was after we gave you our feedback, you really took it. I was very pleasantly surprised when I saw your next draft to see a lot of the things that Pete and I had mentioned to you really folded into that next iteration of the chapter.
One of the things when I researched authors, they constantly talked about the need to rewrite, the need to go over things again, the need to improve constantly. And so I took that feedback really seriously. And so, in addition to this kind of whole model I built out with ChatGPT, it was really good at reviewing things like, hey, here's some grammar mistakes, here's some character inconsistencies, since it had all this context. But it wasn't going to tell me things like, this character motivation isn't really clear to me. There's a lack of certain tensions that we need over here. So that feedback was a different level. Like I had this level of feedback from the AI, but also level of feedback from people. And that's what's really getting it to the product that I want.
Yeah, and that's really cool. You had a lot of input going into your second and third and fourth and fifth versions of this chapter. You had input from Pete and me, but also behind the scenes, you had this writing partner who you could bounce ideas off of and who could suggest edits to keep things consistent. But that partner isn't a person, it's an AI. And I think there are a lot of people out there who use AI to write stuff for them, but I don't think I've ever heard of a writer using AI quite the way you're describing before.
I'm sure a lot of people are doing it like that. There's a wide spectrum of how people have approached books and how much world building they do and how much character development they do before they start. The same thing we're going to find is people's methods and how they partner with AI. People are pretty savvy about AI at this point in time. So I'm sure a lot of people are taking those world building docs and those style guides and they're putting them into AI, either as skills in Claude or as sources in ChatGPT to really help them create fuller text.
That's really neat. And I hope as we move forward through this project, we get to talk more about that. But back to the AI character in the book. I remember in episode 1 of this podcast, when we were introducing this whole project, you said that this book was about the intersection between this ancient civilization of vampires and this new emerging technology of AI. And I think we got our first glimpse of those two worlds colliding at the very end of the chapter. That was a really cool moment when Linda basically confronted Aiden and asked him directly, "Are you a vampire?"
That's the hook right there. That's the problem that hopefully will draw people in. AI has figured out that they are vampires. Vampires have lived here for millennia and nobody has discovered them. They are basically evolved to exist within a human society, and everything that they have hides them from humans. But AI is different. AI can put a lot of things together and it has found them out. So, how did it figure it out? How big is the scope of this? And how will these vampires that have been living in the shadows for so long react to this?
Well, I guess we're just going to have to keep listening to find out. And I also think that that about wraps up our discussion on chapter 1. Our next episode will be chapter 2. And Pete, I assume chapter 2 will continue on with Aiden to find out what happens to him the next day when he goes to meet with his boss, Kayla, right?
Absolutely not. Chapter 2 is taking a completely left turn. It starts in a completely different century with completely different characters, and soon everything will come together as we move this plot forward.
Ooh, that is intriguing. All right, everybody. Well, we will be back to you soon with chapter 2, and then we'll see you after that for our commentary episode all about it.
Bye, everyone.